If you lease it, like you lease a car, a $30,000 car, your price point per month is $300. And that translates amazingly to $10 a day and 40 cents an hour. So you've got labor, right, that's waiting for whatever your wish is. Clean up the house, go mow the lawn, please change the baby's diapers.
Today, we're going to take a deep dive into the wonderful, weird, and maybe worrisome future of humanoid robots. Hello, and welcome to Tech First. My name is John Koetsier. Kind of feels like we're at a tipping point right now for autonomous humanoid robots. Just recently, I wrote about Agility Robotics, the first humanoid robot with an actual paying gig. This week, I wrote in my Forbes column about Figure. 31 months after incorporating, 31 months, Figure is shipping its second model and getting paid. According to a new report, a major report by our guest today, there are now 16 major players in humanoid robotics. And we're going to talk to the author. We're going to talk to him about all this stuff that's going on. Let me intro him. He has a degree in molecular genetics. He's a medical doctor. He created the X Prize Foundation. Ever heard of that? In 1995, think $10 million to get the first private spacecraft into orbit. He co-founded Singularity University with Ray Kurzweil, co-founded an asteroid mining company. How cool is that? And has written many books, including The Future is Faster Than You Think. His name is Peter Diamandis. Welcome, Peter.
My pleasure, John. Good to be here. It is sort of the year 2025. It feels like the future, and it is the future, and it's moving fast. I mean, we're in a period of hypergrowth across almost every tech domain out there. And it's getting exciting. I think that our ability to predict what's coming next is becoming so challenging, but fun.
That's a problem for people like you because it's your business.
Yes, for sure.
Let's dive in. Maybe first, big general question. You wrote this massive report on humanoid robots. Why'd you hit that right now? What interested you in the space? What did you want to accomplish?
Yeah, every year or every other year, I put out what I call the meta trend report. And it's a look at what I consider the massive trends that are unstoppable, that are moving very rapidly. AI is one, humanoid robotics or robotics in general, the revolution in transportation, longevity in biotech. All of these areas are accelerating on the back of computation, on the back of AI. And humanoid robotics, and listen, I grew up on Star Trek, right?
Yep.
The Apollo program lit the fuse. Star Trek showed me where we were going. I was much more a Star Trek than a Star Wars person, but still, C-3PO and R2-D2 were part of the family. At the end of the day, humanoid robotics has always been there at some point in the future, but it's now that it's really materializing, right? We're getting these robots that are multimodal, meaning they understand what they see. You can speak to them, understand what you're asking them to do, and they can communicate back to you. And that's the principal sort of, massively upward tech that's driving it. And at the same time, you've got the convergence of all these other technologies, high energy density batteries, new sensor technologies, new materials, new compute and radios, all these things coming together to make a generation of robots that are going to be actually useful and actually humanoid in many ways. So yeah, I put out this report. It's changing so fast. The report is, Q4 of 2024. I'll update it again next year. There are about 100 or so reasonably to well-funded humanoid robot companies, majority in the United States, a number of them out of China, because China needs them desperately and has a number of economic issues that humanoid robots can't help.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Japan needs them tremendously as well. We all need them as aging societies, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to what you started with, and you kind of ended that bit with, and that was the tremendous amount of change, because I said it in the intro right off the top. Like, this humanoid robots has been kind of it's been our dream. It's been our fantasy for so long. And yet it's just in the last literally 8 to 12 weeks, we've seen tremendous leaps on them. So Figure 1, I talked
Yeah.
about Figure. Their first model moved at 17% the speed of a human. So you want to get that in your logistics operation, in your warehouse, you were going to take a big hit in productivity. Figure two. So one generation, we're
Yeah.
talking literally within a calendar year, is 10 times faster.
Yeah. And Brett Adcock, who's the CEO at Figure, is brilliant. He had built a company called Archer Aviation that is the flying car company, the eVTOL, a name that rolls off the tongue onto the floor, electric vertical takeoff or landing. And he's a friend. He's going to be on my stage this year at the Abundance Summit in March. And full disclosure, my venture fund is an investor in Figure AI. And when I was there, I saw Figure 2. I also saw Figure 3. We're seeing a lot. These these uh, these humanoid robots are iterating very rapidly. And of course, the most magnificent thing in the end result will be robots building robots all the way down.
Yeah. And that's really interesting. You mentioned Figure three. I haven't even heard of that yet. I mean, like the fact that Figure has been able to get to a shipping saleable model 31 months after incorporation speaks to this is an ecosystem because they're probably not building every single component themselves. Now I'm speaking outsider. I don't know, and you don't have to reveal anything.
Well,
But
I think he's, listen, I've had Brett on my Moonshots podcast. We talked about this, and originally he thought he would be able to buy subsystems from suppliers. But the reality is to make it work, to make it reliable, to make it affordable, just like Elon had to vertically integrate in SpaceX, Brett's vertically integrated at Figure as well. So a lot of it, when you go and visit his headquarters and his manufacturing plant, this is where electronics are being built. These are where the mechanical systems are being built. And a lot of it is being sort of, from ground up at Figure, which is allowing them to really understand the entire system and subsystems and be able to make collaborative improvements across these things.
then I'm even more shocked at that pace.
Yeah.
Okay, let's open it up. And I mean, one thing I wanted to ask is when will we have like a good humanoid robot? And I don't know what good means here, but I mean, obviously we have some that are on that spectrum, let's say, and can replace a human, maybe do better, maybe less, or something like that. How do you run that calculus? So what is a good
Yeah.
humanoid robot, and what's your timetable to something that maybe is just as good plug and play as a human in challenging manufacturing situations?
Well, first of all, I just want to offer out to all listeners, you can get the report for free at metatrendreport.com, and you'll see the robotics report there, and you can get all the details. I do go into detail on what I considered at that time 16 of the top robot companies. I probably would add another 4 right now. And we have to look at, in my mind, there are 2 major, the biggest players in the United States, and then there are a number in China. Again, we should really dive into what is driving the situation in China. But in the U.S., Figure and Tesla with Optimus is there, right? So we've seen Optimus 2, we'll see Optimus 3. Now, 2 things that both Brett Adcock and Elon agree on is, number one, we will see by 2040 about 10 billion humanoid robots in the market, which is pretty extraordinary. It's, more than 1 per person. And another side note on that is, Elon recently said something. I interviewed him on stage in Saudi Arabia a few months ago at the FII 8 summit. I've known him for 25 years. And, he said, listen, I expect that Tesla will be known for robot manufacturing more than car manufacturing. Now, if you think about it, the total number of cars on the planet are just about 1 billion. And if there really is going to be a market for 10 billion robots, that's a pretty tasty target to go after. The other thing that both Brett and Elon have said is the price point, likely to be, 20 to 30,000. Let's use $30,000 as the number. And what gets really interesting is that you can predict the price on a per kilogram basis for something that has certain level of complexity in electronics, like a robot, and $30,000 is their number. If you lease it, like you lease a car, $30,000 car, your price point per month is $300. And that would translates amazingly into $10 a day and 40 cents an hour. So you've got labor, right, that's waiting for whatever your wish is. Clean up the house, go mow the lawn, please change the baby's diapers. I mean, I think it'll be a few years before you let the robot change the baby's diapers, but it will get there.
Yeah.
I mean, incredibly how fast AI is materialized as our psychotherapist, our consultant, our physician. It's all moving at that extraordinary rate. So when will we see it in the house? I think we'll see versions available in the house by the end of 2026. They'll
Wow.
be in beta mode, and I can't wait to get one. But by the end of this decade, we'll see them in a variety of places. I'm in Santa Monica having this conversation with you, and what's interesting, and I'm observant of new technology out in the field, right? So for about a year ago to 2 years ago, we would see Waymos driving around the road
Mhm.
with a driver in the driver's seat, and they were mapping roads and gathering data. And now, on a typical day, I'll see 8 to 10 Waymos without a driver in the driver's seat, buzzing on
Big
by,
wheeled robots.
big wheeled robots. And then there's this other little 6-wheeled robot called a Coco that does food delivery that's on the streets here of Santa Monica. And the first time you see that Waymo, the first time you see that Coco robot, you're like taking photos and you're like, wow. And then, a few months later, it's like, please get out of my way, for God's sakes. You're a nuisance. And so I asked my friend, what's it going to feel like when you've got these humanoid robots walking around every place, and he said something very, very wise. He said, it's going to feel normal.
Mhm.
There'll be a point at which it goes from like, wow, to, yeah, that's our world today.
Crazy to imagine right now, but I understand that. The question is, and there's going to be some time to adjust to this, but incredibly short periods of time. When we think about human society, laws, norms, how slowly those can change. We have an atom bomb, a hydrogen bomb, an antimatter bomb that is going to burst on our culture and on our economy in this next 15 to 20 year period,
Mm.
where you said we're getting labor down to $10 a day. That's a wonderful thing in a world where we have tons of jobs that don't happen, that don't get done. We don't clean up our beaches. We don't clean up our our
Correct.
toxic
Totally.
waste. We all that stuff,
Yeah.
and we our elderly are underserved, undercared for, and everything like that. But it's also a very scary world for somebody who earns a living lifting and moving things, or even doing intellectual work. We've seen ChatGPT talk about that.
Yeah. So it is fascinating. And we'll see certain transitions like an Uber driver in the future, rather than driving a car around to earn money, may well buy 3 or 4 cybercabs and own a fleet of cybercabs that go around and earn that person money while they're at home watching TV or going to school. So we'll put that to work. I was on stage years ago with a Indian guru by the name of Sadhguru. I don't know if you know him.
I
And we
don't.
were on. He's brilliant, and he said something I never forget. He said, "Technology is the means by which humanity takes a vacation from survival." Right. So we have, for all of human history, right? Homo sapiens are some 300,000 years old. Majority of our existence as our current species, and before that with our predecessors, was about fundamental survival. That's what your job was, to
Mhm,
survive,
mhm,
find
mhm.
food, find shelter, not get eaten. That was it. And recently, sometime over the last few hundred years, we came up with this idea of a job.
Mhm.
Like, a job is a rather recent, construct. Maybe it's 500 years, 1,000 years, but it wasn't much more, right? There was the priesthood, there was a scholar, there were a few different things. Everybody else just farmed food to get food and survived. So unfortunately, much of our culture is entwined with, tell me about yourself. Well, I'm a writer. I'm a reporter, I'm a physician, I'm a whatever, I'm a lawyer, whatever your job is, and we get so entwined with that. So the challenge is going to be when these AI-driven elements, right? The AI physical embodiment in a robot or an AI uh, in a GPT advanced model is doing what you're doing better than you do it.
Mm-hmm.
And how will we deal with that? Will we partner with it? Will we get jealous of it? Will we find other things to do with our time? The majority of the world has a job not because they love what they're doing. They have a job because it's what puts food on the table and gives them insurance for their family. And they didn't dream about doing that when they were a kid.
No, no, no.
Yeah,
They didn't dream about moving part A to slot B or something like
yeah.
that. Absolutely 100%. And that I love that part of it. And I love, hopefully we can have the freedom to become more human and also
Mhm.
to find things where we can contribute value that a machine can't in some way, shape, or form, and also that contribute value to our own sense. But it does mean we have to reinvent our economic system. Are you confident that we can do that?
Yeah, so that's a really important point. The classical economics that have governed our world are broken and no longer apply. And if I had enough time, I would work on an economics book, but I don't. I've got three in production, but not one in economics. The global GDP is in 2025 is estimated to be about 110 trillion dollars. Okay, half of that is labor, meaning half of that is the potential market for humanoid robots
Mm-hmm.
globally. It's a massive, massive opportunity, and which is why we're seeing so many robot companies coming in and capital being invested into building these companies. So we're going to, if you look at putting the cost of labor in the denominator and dividing it by really, really small numbers tending towards zero, you get a global GDP that sort of goes through the roof.
Mm-hmm.
There was one idea years ago, I don't know if it was attributed to Jeff Bezos or someone else, which is at some point when we start replacing humans with AI or robots, we're going to tax the AI and robots and
Bill
use that.
Gates.
It was Bill Gates. Okay, we'll use that tax base to create some version of UBI, right?
Mm-hmm.
Universal basic income. I think people, the biggest concern I have is that people need purpose and people need struggle. Not too much struggle, but the right amount of struggle, right? So
Yep.
I have two 13-year-old boys. They love their video games, and if the video game's too easy, it's boring, they stop. If it's too hard, they don't play. It just getting that right positioning. So, you know, we rise to the level of the struggle in our job, in our communities that we feel like we can achieve. So what's it going to be like when these robots and these AIs are able to enable us to do, want to write a book? You click this button. Your book is published under your name, but it was written by
Yeah.
your AI. Um, I mean, this is the exciting future. I mean, I wrote my first book was called Abundance: The Future is Better Than You Think, and I just sold a follow-on called Age of Abundance. Elon's agreed to write the forward for it, which will come out in 2026. And the argument for creating increasing abundance in the world, defined by enabling every man, woman, and child to have access to all the food, water, energy, healthcare, education that they desire. That story has gotten incredibly better, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
and it's AI and robotics that's going to enable that age of abundance, where effectively the cost of things, tends towards zero.
The cost of education alone. I mean, I'm a ChatGPT subscriber and I'm a curious person. And you see something, you snap a picture or you ask a question, and the amount that you can learn, the curiosity machine that it has become is incredible.
Yeah.
I loved your point about frustration. I spoke to a game designer one time. He said a perfect game is a balance between frustration and pleasure.
Yes. Yeah. For sure. So robots in particular, right? A few questions to ask ourselves here, which is they're humanoid robots. Why are they humanoid? Why are
Yes.
all of these robots coming out with 10 fingers, two legs, a head, a body? why aren't they coming out like an octopus? Why aren't they coming out with, 6 arms, 12 fingers per hand and so forth? And it's interesting, right? Because there's a psychological trade and there's a environmental interface trade. So the theory is that everything that a human can do, everything that's been built for humans, a humanoid robot can do. You can crawl under a bed to grab a sock. It can open a door. It can climb stairs. It can pick up a hand drill. And you don't have to retool the world around us for a humanoid robot, because humanoid robot is effectively doing what every human could do.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that fascinating and I think true. A friend of mine said, but what, don't you want like a kitchen robot to have multiple arms so you can pick up all the ingredients and be mixing them together? And I said, sure, but that's a kitchen robot, not a humanoid robot. And if you had one humanoid robot and you needed more arms, you could put 3 in the kitchen and have them collaborate.
Mm-hmm.
It is going to be fascinating to see what models. I mean, science fiction has done us a service of preparing us for this future. We saw all the droids on Star Wars, and we saw Data on Star Trek, and we've seen Bicentennial Man. Did you see the recent robot called Clone?
I did not.
So there's
not?
There's a robot that is effectively using hydraulics instead of electromechanical systems, and so it has created arms where the muscular system, like in our forearm here, moving the hands, and our muscles act in myosin, contract and expand, and they use hydraulics to contract and expand, and it looks like Westworld. It looks identical to Westworld, and that's an interesting approach to it. So we're going to still see these things evolving continuously over the decades ahead, getting more and more human-like.
It is really interesting to have humanoid robots, and I understand it from the point of view, hey, it interfaces with our world. It's interesting if in 50 years or 100 years, almost all work is done by robots. We start saying, hey, we don't need to make things that work in the world of humans. The world of humans doesn't intersect with all that making and building and shipping and stuff like that. We'll make whatever we want to make.
Yeah.
It's also interesting to think, okay, I can only afford one robot. I need one that does them all, right? And hey, you can get the extra arm attachment that plugs into the chest, and now your cook has 3 arms, right? So the world is our oyster. We can do what we want.
And the beautiful thing about it all is it's self-referential and evolving, meaning, in the not too distant future, we'll have a set of AIs designing all these generations of robots, and the robots will build the next generations of robots, and you'll try a whole bunch of them. You'll see which ones work and which one stand up. And there will be robots that work the field that look different perhaps than robots that are in a automotive manufacturing. But in the beginning, we're starting with a general purpose humanoid robot. Now, what's the limitations on these things? Is it power? Is it compute? Is it wear and tear? It's still the early days. And what's interesting as well is, if you think about it, in the beginning of the automotive age, circa the 2010s to 20s, there were hundreds of car companies, hundreds of them. And everybody was getting in, everybody was designing theirs, and then they fought it out and got the primes or the majors around the world. I think it's the same thing in robots. We're going to see hundreds of robots, the companies, and then there will be, a top, 5, 10, 20 of them around the world.
The other interesting thing about the early days of automotive is you didn't have vertical integration in a lot of cases. You had people who would build a chassis, and you had coach makers who would make the actual sort of part of the car that humans lived in. And that's a question I've had. I mean, you've listed 16 major players in the report. You say I'd actually probably add 4 more just off the top of my head right now. Do you see this evolving in a way sort of like the Wintel thing evolved, where there's software and there's hardware divisions? You talked about the integration at companies being really, really critical and important. And Apple follows that model to a T, obviously. But we also see a lot of robots that, hey, you can put Claude in there, you can put ChatGPT in there, you can put Gemini in there, whatever. How do you
Yeah.
see that all evolving?
Yeah. Well, we're seeing that right now. We're seeing, like, for example, obviously, Tesla and Optimus will focus using Grok and XAI. It'll be
Hmm.
a full integration. And in fact, all of the Optimus robots, as they're working out in the environment and they're seeing things, they're collecting data to help train the next generation of Grok 4, right? We talk about a data wall. We don't have enough data to train the next generations. Well, we're going to get the data from these robots out there interacting with the
Hmm.
real world. We've seen basically Figure is aligned fully with OpenAI,
Hmm.
right? But then you've got Peggy Johnson at Agility, right? They have their robot Digit, and they are basically open to any system.
Yeah.
And so you'll have that where some of the robot companies will just swap in whichever large language model makes sense. You've got NVIDIA investing in many of these top companies because they want to keep the party going. These
Hmm.
robots are a way to, continue creation of chips and demand for large language models. But then you've got China, and we should talk about China for a second, shall we?
Yes, let's.
Yeah. So, I mean, what made China successful over the last 40 odd years is their low labor rate. Um, they had a lot of humans at very low cost that could manufacture almost anything. And we in the Western world were willing to take that super low cost and pay the additional for shipping and delays and put our supply chain, on the other side of the planet,
Out of our
um,
control.
out of our control, because the Chinese manufacturing was so cheap and reliable, right? Foxconn over there making the Apple
Mhm.
iPhones very famously. And then, of course, COVID hit and the supply chain broke. And everybody's saying we're going to onshore stuff now. So manufacturing gets pulled out of China. At the same time, the results of the one child policy materialize.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, there's an aging population. You have a much less youth coming in because they cut the reproduction rate in half. You have an aging population that needs help. They think about this. You got 4 grandparents and 1 kid.
I know. Wow.
Yeah, it's tough. And the cost of living has been going up in China, so the labor rate per hour is going up. And as a result of this, China desperately needs humanoid robots for a number of reasons. One, take care of the elderly, and two, to keep their cost right. Because again, think about this: California minimum wage is $20 an hour. How do you ever not put a robot in that spot at 40 cents an hour,
Yeah.
which works 24/7, no drug testing, and no fights with her girlfriend or boyfriend, no sick days? I mean, it gets pretty compelling. So
Hmm.
China needs it. It's an existential threat for China. And as you said, Japan, other parts of Asia, much of Europe, Elon's been very loud about this. I have as well, that the biggest problem on the planet is not going to be overpopulation of Earth, it's underpopulation.
Hmm. 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 I think we're a ways from that, but obviously the trends are in that direction, certainly in certain nations, no doubt about it. The interesting thing about China as well is that their competitive advantage over the past probably 2 decades has shifted from being the lowest cost area to the ecosystem of production capability. So you need to make something. All the makers of all the bits are in the same 20
Yes.
mile radius, 30-kilometer radius, whatever it is. And it's really hard to like invent that instantly reinvent that in America or Western Europe or something like that. So we'll interest to see how that goes. Also interesting to see how 3D printing, if that evolves further, comes into this question as well. I mean, the idea of the cornucopia and, you manufacture wherever you are, right?
Yeah,
That puts everything
for,
upside
for
down.
sure. And I mean, the 3D printing market's been crushed over the last few years. If you look at companies going out of business and so forth, but still we're seeing 3D printing as important components in automotive, in rockets, you know,
Rockets, exactly.
yeah,
Rockets, the
yeah,
toughest spot.
yeah, pretty extraordinary in rocket engine development. You have
The
relativity
US
space.
Navy, I
Yeah,
need a part. I'm in the
yeah,
middle of the Mediterranean. The part is in that I need is in Virginia, and
yes.
I'll make one right now.
Yeah, it is extraordinary. But I do agree with you. I can imagine 3D printers cranking out components for robots on demand. You know, need to fix it instead of keeping a supply of all the components. You've got files, and you just hit print on what you need. Um,
It's amazing. I mean, we can go lots of different places. Imagine going to the moon, imagine going to the Mars, and you have the capability. You find the resources and you build what you want on site rather than shipping it all there, right? So we can go all kinds of directions that are way too far here. You mentioned, let's talk top players, and then maybe let's wrap
yeah,
after that. You
sure.
mentioned 16 major players. You mentioned 2 in the States. You mentioned China. There's a bunch there. Who are you seeing as kind of leading the space right now that really interesting to watch?
Well, I mean, without question, from my mind, it's Figure uh, and Optimus, right? Figure and Tesla. You also have a company that manufactures the Apollo robot, Optronics.
Was oh
Um,
yes, yeah.
yeah, and I think Optronics is doing a damn good design, and they were early in this. In fact, a lot of the work done by other robot companies were done by Optronics,
Hmm.
and they've ended up uh, basically supporting these companies. Um, you know, there.
And
Let
what's
me just.
interesting about
Yeah,
them as well is that they have a very pragmatic approach. I've interviewed their CEO, very interesting, long history in building automation parts and stuff like that. And they're building up to the full humanoid robot here. And they'll do what works, what's necessary. They won't go, they're not going for the moonshot. They're
right.
going for what works today and tomorrow. It's a really unique approach. And I'm interested in them. Agility, I think, is super interesting as well.
Agility. Yep. With their
Why are you high on Tesla? I mean, and on Optimus? Because we've seen interesting progress there, no doubt about it. But we've also seen, kind of avatar ride-alongs, you put it that way. So there's been some doubt there.
I'm high on it because I would never bet against Elon, bluntly. I also think that they have one of the most advanced engineering and AI capabilities in house, and
Hmm.
he's identified this as the core of their future. Um, you've got Boston
Interesting.
Dynamics, of course.
Yep.
The team at Boston Dynamics has been a leader in this area for ages. Their old version of their robot Atlas used to be hydraulics, right?
Hmm.
And it would do their famous video doing flips and backflips and doing parkour. And they just moved Atlas from hydraulics, which would leak hydraulics literally, but it was super strong. And they've transitioned it to an all electric. They're partnered with NVIDIA, and they're an amazing company, uh, and at a billion plus valuation.
Hmm. Hmm.
Unitree out of China, I
Yep.
think is doing extremely well. Another company at $1 billion. And what's interesting about Unitree is that they proposed a robot at a $16,000 price tag.
Wow.
Um, and then, of course, the U.S. tariffs would double that to $32,000. But it's a small and agile robot that can be available. And I can imagine a future in which you've got a few of these, and they are just in the background doing their work, doing the
Hmm.
gardening, cleaning up the house behind you. Right? There's 1X Technologies that
Just
is,
make life better.
yeah, 1X is also partnered with OpenAI. So you see OpenAI and NVIDIA partnering with a number of these companies and providing the software layer. Uh,
I'm
you know,
trying to recollect from your report, and
yeah,
it's evading me. Europe. Are we seeing anything interesting in Europe? I mean,
no,
there's major automation and manufacturing and engineering houses in Europe.
there are.
Schunk comes to mind, others. But are you seeing anything interesting in robots?
I'm not yet, not that have really made it to the top dozen.
Hmm.
Again, we've got Agibot out of China. We've got a company called Beijing HRIC out of China. Again, a number of these companies. And at the end of the day, and also one other one, there is one out of Europe. It's out of the UK. It's Engineered Arts, right? It's
Yes.
the Amica robot.
Yep.
And Amica, I've had on my stage at the Abundance Summit a number of times. What makes Amica super super cool is the facial expressions, right? Amica's got something like 30 actuators in,
Mhm.
I'm going to say her face. I'm going to give her a
Gender.
gender. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I've had her on stage a few times, and Amica runs any large language model that you want. Will Jackson, who's the CEO there, is incredible. And Amica is the kind of humanoid robot that would be at the front desk of a hotel or a concierge service that's there to interact with you, help you out. So out of Europe, really, for me, Amica is the likely major player today. I'm sure there have to be companies out of Germany
There
that are being
have to
developed.
be.
Yeah.
And I mean, Europe is like Japan in that sense as well, huge need as well. And Europe also, because it's the European community, they have sort of a collective will
Mindset.
to
Yeah.
do certain things sometimes, whether it's an airplane and manufacturing that, whether it's whatever it is. And so if they see something that they think is critical for their well-being and survival, they'll put a big team, international team on it.
Yep. But I think at the end of the day, it is going to be uh, the cost it's the players are going to be the players who are manufacturing the most, bringing the cost per unit down, and able to ride the AI curve
Hmm.
uh, and integrate whatever the most powerful AI is. Now, you have to remember that these robots share another major benefit. When you have a fleet of 1,000, 100,000, a million robots, and one robot sees something unique that no other robot has ever seen before,
Yes.
all of a sudden,
Yes.
all the robots now understand that.
Yeah.
And so one of the questions I say is, listen, I have a medical family and I have a few nieces that are in medical school. One is a surgeon. I'm going, you're going to be replaced by robots.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I don't mean robots where it's a extension of a human. I mean a robot doing the surgery on its own.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if you want to know that if you're interviewing a surgeon, there's one question you ask the surgeon. Do you know what it is?
I
When you
have
try,
no idea. How
it's
steady are your hands?
it's how many times have you done this surgery this morning? Right? It's
Ouch.
the frequency at which a surgeon has done a particular surgery. Uh, is critical. Their success rate is a function of that because they've seen every variation of every
Mhm.
situation, and they have a font of knowledge which wouldn't surprise them in a particular
Mhm.
case. Now, of course, a surgeon may do a few thousand surgeries, but imagine a robotic surgeon that has shared the experience of 10 million surgeries, and they all have seen it. And the
Yep.
robot surgeon hand doesn't have any jitter. The robot can see in infrared and ultraviolet, didn't have too much coffee that morning, no fight with their spouse in the morning. And so we're going to see robots entering into interesting places. My favorite is you need surgery, you're at the hospital and you see this human coming at you, introducing themselves as your surgeon, and you go, oh, no, 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 I do not want that human touching me. I want the robot that's done it a million times.
The thing that comes to mind is the first Neuralink patient.
Mm,
The human surgeon prepped and drilled through the skull. The robotic surgeon actually inserted the electrodes into the brain, and
yeah,
and that went incredibly well in a very short period of time. The other thing that you just mentioned, right? Like those robot surgeons, they've seen it done. They've essentially done, because it's a distributed being in a sense in terms of intelligence, a million surgeries. They don't have one specialty because they've seen
everything.
500 different
Yeah.
surgeries done and have all that experience from all over the world. It's a crazy, interesting world we're going into. I want to thank you for the report and for sharing it.
Thank you.
You have a conference that's coming up in LA. You mentioned it once.
Yeah.
What is that
Yeah,
conference name
it's
again?
called, thank you. It's called the Abundance Summit, and the program's Abundance 360. People can go to abundance360.com to learn. We spend a deep dive, full day in AI. Some of the top CEOs, AI companies that are there. Elon was speaking last year. I'll see if I can get him back again this year. We go into a day on exponential tech. Kathy Wood, Vinod Khosla, two of the biggest investors in the field, are there. Brett Atcock will be there. I have Max Hodak, who's the co-founder of Neuralink with Elon, but he's got a new version of brain-computer interface speaking. So we have a day, we do a big session on blockchain and crypto. Then a day on longevity technologies and a day on moonshots. Like, how do you build a moonshot company? So that's Abundance 360. And then again, this humanoid report, please get it, consume it. I have a whole section on first principle thinking and the fundamentals that are making this robot companies materialize. And that's at metatrendreport.com. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for this time. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Pleasure speaking with you. Happy holidays.